Have you ever wondered how one small act of disrespect can reveal the true character of a person and change lives forever? Thomas sat alone at a corner table in the bustling heart of San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant, the Marquis. The glow from the pendant lights flickered softly, casting warm reflections on polished wine glasses and gleaming silverware. The room buzzed with muted laughter, the clinking of cutlery, and the low hum of conversations blending into a symphony of indulgence. Yet, amid the elegant chaos, Thomas remained invisible. He had been there for 45 minutes. His table, though perfectly set, lacked the one thing that mattered: attention. The waitstaff glided past him effortlessly, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the furniture. Thomas, an impeccably dressed man in a tailored navy suit, his Rolex catching the faint light, sat with a composed demeanor. But beneath the calm surface, his patience thinned with each passing minute. It wasn't as if he didn't belong. Thomas was an accomplished investor from Silicon Valley, a man whose decisions had shifted markets and turned small startups into billion-dollar enterprises. But none of that mattered here. To them, he was just another face, one they chose not to see. Finally, a waiter approached, not with a welcoming smile or an apology for the delay, but with an arched brow and a tone dipped in condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his words sharp as glass, glancing at Thomas's untouched menu as if it were evidence against him. Thomas met his gaze with quiet intensity, his voice steady. "I'd like to order now." Reluctantly, the waiter scribbled down the order, his dismissive attitude lingering in the air like an unwelcome shadow. Throughout the meal, the service remained cold. Water glasses stayed half empty, requests were met with sighs, and other diners, mostly affluent, mostly white, received the kind of attention Thomas was deliberately denied. But Thomas wasn't here just to dine. He was here on business, a business he already owned. He listened as the same waiter bragged to another employee about the restaurant being on the market, scoffing at potential buyers, saying, "We need someone who understands the clientele, the right kind of people." His laughter carried a sting sharper than the finest champagne. Thomas finished his meal in silence, his face a mask of professionalism, revealing nothing. When the check arrived, he didn't flinch at the inflated total. Instead, he asked, "Could I speak to the manager, please?" The waiter hesitated, then nodded, likely expecting a complaint, perhaps about the service, maybe the food. But Thomas wasn't there to complain. The manager arrived, a polished man with rehearsed charm. Thomas stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and extended his hand. "Good evening. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Thomas Reed, the new owner of the Marquis." The words landed with the force of an earthquake, rippling through the room as nearby conversations faltered. The manager's smile faded, replaced by stunned disbelief. The waiter's face drained of color, his confidence crumbling in real time. Thomas continued, his tone even, his gaze unwavering. "Tonight was my final evaluation of the staff before I make decisions about changes. I appreciate the candid display of service." The following day, the staff gathered for a meeting. The tension was palpable, heavy with anticipation. Thomas stood before them, not with anger, but with purpose. He introduced an extensive program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It wasn't just a box to tick. It was personal. Addressing the room, Thomas's voice carried the weight of his experience. "Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do. Talent can get you far, but character determines if you stay." He looked directly at the waiter, offering a choice. "You can commit to genuine change, starting with our new training program, or you're free to seek opportunities elsewhere." The waiter's arrogance was gone, replaced by a mix of shame and silent reflection. It was a chance, not just to keep a job, but to confront who he had been. because sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't in punishment. It's in the opportunity to change. The days following that pivotal meeting felt different within the walls of the Marquee. The once unshakable confidence of the staff had been replaced by a quiet self-awareness, a fragile recognition of their own biases lingering just beneath the surface. The restaurant's sleek modern decor remained untouched, gleaming marble floors, ambient lighting, and tables adorned with minimalist floral arrangements, but the energy had shifted. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting to see who would rise and who would retreat. Thomas returned frequently, not as the invisible diner, but as the undeniable owner. His presence was steady, yet unintrusive, observing interactions, noting subtle changes. Some employees adjusted quickly, eager to prove their professionalism transcended prejudice. Others struggled, their discomfort revealing how deeply their biases were rooted. And then there was Mark, the waiter from that first night. Mark had chosen to stay. The training sessions were mandatory, led by a firm specializing in workplace equity. The instructors didn't lecture, they confronted. Through exercises designed to expose unconscious biases, employees faced mirrors they had long avoided. Mark sat through each session with a stiff posture, his jaw clenched, arms crossed defensively. His pride, once a shield, now felt like an anchor, dragging him into waters he never thought he'd navigate. But something began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, no single aha moment that flipped a switch. It was gradual, like erosion, subtle yet undeniable. A story shared by a colleague about being overlooked because of an accent, a video showing microaggressions disguised as politeness, a statistic about lost business opportunities tied to discriminatory practices. They weren't just abstract concepts anymore, they were reflections of behaviors Mark had once dismissed as normal. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session on empathy and active listening, Mark lingered behind. The room had emptied, but Thomas remained, reviewing notes by the window, sunlight casting long shadows across the polished floor. Mark approached, his usual confidence replaced by something raw and unpolished. "Mr. Reed," he began, his voice quieter than usual, I've been thinking about that night." Thomas didn't look up immediately, giving Mark the space to fill the silence. "I was out of line," Mark admitted, his words heavy with the weight of acknowledgement. "I thought I was being professional, but I see now I was being something else entirely. I never really saw you. I saw what I wanted to see." Thomas finally met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "And what do you see now?" Mark hesitated, searching for an answer that wasn't rehearsed. "Someone who gave me a chance I didn't deserve." Thomas nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Change isn't about what you've done, it's about what you choose to do next." From that day, Mark's transformation was subtle but sincere. He greeted every guest with the same warmth, regardless of appearance. He listened more than he spoke. He corrected colleagues gently when old habits resurfaced, not because he feared Thomas's authority, but because he understood something deeper. Respect isn't transactional, it's foundational. Meanwhile, the Marquee thrived. Word spread about the restaurant's new culture, attracting a diverse clientele who felt genuinely welcomed, not just served. Revenues grew, but for Thomas, the real success couldn't be measured in profit margins. It was in the subtle exchanges, a smile exchange between strangers, a genuine thank you from a guest, the absence of that old, invisible wall. Yet Thomas's journey wasn't just about changing a restaurant, it was about confronting his own reflections. Despite his success, he had spent years navigating spaces where he was the only one who looked like him, battling the silent assumptions stitched into every handshake, every skeptical glance. Owning the marquee wasn't just a business move. It was personal. It was reclaiming spaces that had always been his, even when the world suggested otherwise. One evening, after closing time, Thomas stood alone in the dining room. The city lights painted the windows with a soft, golden hue. Mark approached, no longer the hesitant man from weeks ago, but not the arrogant waiter from before either. Just Mark. "Thank you," he said simply. No grand speeches, just 2 words, carrying the weight of a transformation. Thomas smiled, not out of pride, but recognition. We're all still learning. Because the truth is, growth isn't a destination. It's a journey, a continuous one, marked not by perfection, but by progress. Months passed, and the marquee became more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol, not of perfection, but of progress, a living testament to what could happen when accountability met compassion. The transformation wasn't plastered on billboards or shouted through marketing campaigns. It was in the everyday moments, quiet but powerful. Thomas continued to lead with a steady hand, not micromanaging but guiding. He believed that real change couldn't be forced, it had to be nurtured. And Mark's growth was no longer a surprise to anyone, least of all himself. His rigid posture had softened, replaced by genuine ease. Conversations with guests flowed naturally, free from the guarded professionalism that once masked his insecurities. He had become one of the restaurant's most requested servers, not because he tried harder, but because he had learned to simply see people. One evening, the marquee hosted a charity event for a local youth mentorship program, an initiative Thomas personally supported. The dining room was filled with community leaders, entrepreneurs, and young people eager to imagine futures beyond the limitations society often placed on them. Mark was assigned to a table of teenagers from the program, bright-eyed, curious, some a little shy, others masking their nerves with forced confidence. As he served them, he noticed one boy, maybe 15, sitting quietly, his gaze distant. Mark recognized that look. It was the same one he used to have when he felt invisible. After taking their orders, Mark returned to the boy, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, not with the forced cheer of customer service, but with genuine curiosity. The boy hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't really fit in here." Mark smiled softly. "I know the feeling. But here's the thing, I used to think fitting in was about being like everyone else. Turns out it's about being yourself and letting people see you." The boy didn't respond right away, but his posture shifted just a little. A small change, but sometimes that's all it takes. Across the room, Thomas observed the exchange, a quiet smile touching the corners of his mouth. This was the legacy he wanted, not just profits or recognition, but ripples of impact spreading in ways no business plan could predict. Later that night, after the event ended and the last table was cleared, Mark approached Thomas. No formalities, no pretense, just 2 men who had unknowingly become part of each other's stories. "I think I finally get it," Mark said, leaning against the bar. Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Get what?" Mark looked around the restaurant, his eyes lingering on the empty tables that had once felt like battlegrounds for his ego. "It's not just about not being a bad person, it's about choosing to be a better one every day." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's the real work." The simplicity of that exchange held more weight than any corporate training or motivational speech. It was authentic, raw, and earned. Years later, the marquee's story would be shared in business seminars, diversity workshops, and leadership courses. But for Thomas and Mark, it wasn't about becoming a case study. It was about the quiet victories, the lives touched, the lessons learned, the growth that happened in the spaces between mistakes and apologies. And for anyone who walked through those doors, the unspoken message lingered. Respect isn't optional. Kindness isn't conditional. And real success, it's measured not by what you achieve, but by who you become along the way. If you enjoyed the story, share it.